Julius Caesar was born at the beginning of the 1st century before our era, in a Rome undergoing profound transformation. He came from the Julian genes, an ancient patrician family that claimed descent from the goddess Venus through her son Aeneas. Although his lineage was indisputable, the fortune of his house had declined. The Julians no longer held the eminent positions they once occupied in Roman society. The young Gaius Julius Caesar grew up in an environment where the memory of Rome's past triumphs was still vivid, but the future appeared increasingly uncertain. Rome, once founded upon virtue and simplicity, was slowly sinking into corruption and the violence of internal strife. The streets murmured with rumors of conspiracies, the forums vibrated with fierce debates, and the unchecked ambitions of a few men threatened to set the Republic ablaze. His father, also named Gaius Julius Caesar, held modest administrative posts, preferring a discreet career to the dangers of active politics. His mother, Aurelia Cotta, was a woman respected for her dignity, intelligence, and moral rigor. It was she who instilled in Caesar the fundamental values that would guide his life: discipline, ambition, and a profound sense of duty toward his family and toward Rome. From an early age, Caesar received the traditional education of a patrician. He studied the art of rhetoric, essential for shining in the forum, Roman law, the very foundation of society, and Greek literature, whose wisdom and beauty fascinated the Roman elite. Greek, the language of philosophers and poets, was not merely knowledge, but a key to understanding the world and exercising authority over others. The first years of Caesar's life were marked by personal tragedies. His father died suddenly while Caesar was still a teenager. This loss forced him to mature quickly. As head of the family, he had to care for his mother and sisters while pursuing his own ambitions. But even before his political career could properly begin, his destiny was shaped by alliances and perilous decisions. At the age of 16, Caesar was appointed Flamen Dialis, a high priest of Jupiter, a religious position of great prestige but strict limitations, severely restricting political opportunities. Nevertheless, in a Rome where the boundaries between spiritual and temporal power often blurred, this nomination was not without advantages. It affirmed his rank, his noble origins, and his potential. However, the political situation would soon upend his life. In the 48th year before our era, Sulla, the bloodthirsty dictator, dominated Rome. Suspecting Caesar of sympathies toward the Marian faction, due to his family connections to Marius, Sulla demanded that Caesar break off his engagement to Cornelia, the daughter of Cinna, one of Marius's chief allies. Caesar, standing firm, refused to submit, despite the threat of death. Sulla, persuaded by influential friends of Caesar, reluctantly spared him, but not without uttering the famous prophetic words, "There are many Mariuses in this young man." A sentence that would echo through history. Forced to flee to avoid execution, Caesar enlisted in the army, where he would begin to forge his legend. He served in Asia and Cilicia, participating in several military campaigns where he displayed exceptional courage. During the siege of Mytilene, he distinguished himself by his bravery and was awarded the Civic Crown, one of the highest honors for saving the life of a fellow Roman citizen. These early military experiences were foundational. They taught him the discipline of command, the art of strategy, and most importantly, the vital importance of military prestige for political advancement. In Rome, no one could aspire to greatness without proving himself on the battlefield. Upon his return to Rome after Sulla's death, Caesar embarked on his true public career. He was young, ambitious, charismatic, and possessed a remarkable mastery of oratory. He first made his mark as a lawyer, defending complex cases, often against powerful figures, thereby earning the admiration of the populace. He quickly understood that to triumph in the brutal political arena of Rome, he needed the support of the masses. Through passionate speeches and carefully calculated acts of generosity, he positioned himself as the champion of the poor, denouncing the corruption of the aristocrats and the decadence of the senatorial elite. At the same time, he carefully built alliances. He drew close to influential figures like Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, whose fortune would prove essential in financing his ambitions. Caesar also wielded his personal charm, quick wit, and diplomatic skill with remarkable effectiveness. His rise seemed unstoppable. Each step, each speech, each gesture was meticulously calculated. He cultivated his image with ruthless precision, always presenting himself as a humble servant of Rome, even as he secretly nurtured an immense dream, to one day command it. The foundations of his future greatness were already laid. Soon, the entire world would know his name. But before that, Caesar would have to face deadly dangers, overcome jealous rivals, thwart conspiracies, and assert his authority in a city that neither forgot nor forgave failure or weakness. Strengthened by his initial successes and his steady ascent within political circles, Julius Caesar plunged wholeheartedly into the labyrinth of Roman power. Rome at that time was a city where ambitions clashed at every corner, where alliances were forged and broken with alarming speed, and where political survival depended as much on cunning as on courage. After occupying several minor offices, Caesar achieved the quaestorship, a modest but essential step on the cursus honorum. His appointment sent him to Hispania Ulteria, a distant province where he encountered firsthand the challenges of administration. There, he honed his organizational skills and learned the critical importance of effective governance for securing loyalty and prosperity. Upon his return, he pursued his rise without pause. He was elected curule aedile, a prestigious post that allowed him to gain popular favor through magnificent games and public works. Caesar did not hesitate to plunge himself into deep debt to finance lavish spectacles, gladiatorial combats, and grand restorations. He knew that in popular Rome, spectacular generosity was the surest path to lasting influence. His personal charm, calculated generosity, and skill in pandering to the desires of the populace made him a dominant figure in public life. The conservative senators viewed him with growing unease, although they had yet to grasp the full extent of his ambition. He continued climbing the ladder by securing the praetorship, a prominent judicial office where he demonstrated exceptional skill in navigating laws and legal subtleties. He reinforced his image as a defender of the people, standing against the excesses of the senatorial oligarchy. But Caesar knew that true power lay higher still. He set his sights on the consulship, the supreme annual magistracy of the Roman Republic. Attaining this post was no simple matter. Competition was fierce, the candidates numerous, and the intrigues relentless. To maximize his chances, Caesar forged decisive alliances. He entered into a secret pact with two of the most powerful men of his era, Crassus, whose immense fortune financed his ambitions, and Pompey, the celebrated general adored by the people. This alliance, later known as the First Triumvirate, silently but dramatically shifted the balance of power in Rome. Each man had something to gain. Crassus sought protection for his vast financial interests. Pompey desired the ratification of his conquests and agrarian laws, and Caesar needed the consulship to open the gateway to even greater horizons. Thanks to this secret understanding, Caesar was elected consul for the year 49 before our era. His campaign had been marked by audacious promises and tireless energy. Once in office, he employed every means at his disposal to solidify his authority. His consulship was tumultuous. From the earliest months, he introduced legislation favorable to Pompey's veterans and indebted citizens, directly challenging the conservative Senate. To force the passage of his laws, he relied on popular assemblies and did not shy away from intimidation. His political enemies, such as Cato the Younger, decried his methods, but the people embraced him with fervor. At the end of his term, Caesar faced a common threat. Former consuls were frequently prosecuted by political enemies once they lost their legal immunity. To protect himself, he secured the proconsular command of several provinces: Cisalpine Gaul, Transalpine Gaul, and Illyricum, along with control over several legions for a term of 5 years. This shrewd maneuver guaranteed him not only legal protection, but also command over a significant military force. Caesar understood that military glory was the surest foundation for supreme political power in Rome. Thus began one of the most famous military campaigns in history, the conquest of Gaul. For nearly a decade, Caesar would expand Rome's borders to the Atlantic, subdue dozens of tribes, and forge a legend that would eclipse all his contemporaries. Yet on the eve of this new adventure, Rome remained outwardly tranquil. The Senate watched Caesar with suspicion, but many clung to the illusion that the traditional balance of power could still endure. Only a few realized that beneath the surface, Rome's destiny was quietly being rewritten. Caesar, guided by an unshakable belief in his star, advanced with determination. He had woven alliances, won elections, tamed rivals, and captured the hearts of the masses. Now he prepared to seize an empire. The conquest of Gaul was for Julius Caesar far more than a series of military campaigns. It became the foundation of his glory, the careful construction of his personal myth, and the platform that would soon alter the destiny of Rome. From the moment he assumed command, Caesar understood that his future hinged on transforming this opportunity into a resounding triumph. Gaul, at that time, was not a unified territory. It consisted of a mosaic of peoples and tribes, proud, independent, and often at odds with one another. The Helvetii, the Aedui, the Arverni, the Belgae, the Veneti. All these Gallic nations nursed old rivalries, fragile alliances, and conflicting ambitions. Caesar saw in their divisions a unique opportunity. The campaign began with the migration of the Helvetii. This migratory people sought to abandon their ancestral lands and settle in western Gaul, threatening the delicate balance of the region. Under the pretext of defending Rome's allies, Caesar blocked their movement. Through a series of brilliantly executed maneuvers, he crushed them at the Battle of Bibracte. This achievement, magnified by his own commentaries on the Gallic War, immediately cemented his reputation as a brilliant strategist. Encouraged by this initial success, Caesar continued his campaign against Germanic tribes led by King Ariovistus, who had crossed the Rhine. Through a combination of military audacity and diplomatic cunning, he expelled this threat, securing Rome's northern frontier. In the following years, Caesar waged relentless campaigns against the Belgae, renowned for their courage, against the Veneti, masters of Atlantic navigation, and against numerous other tribes. Each victory further elevated his prestige and popularity back in Rome, where his political enemies watched his rising power with mounting dread. Yet Caesar did not limit his warfare to the battlefield. He deployed propaganda with masterful skill. His commentaries, written in a clear, direct style, were designed to be read by both the Senate and the people. They cast his actions in a favorable light, magnifying his triumphs, justifying his decisions, and steadily building the image of an invincible and just leader. The campaign reached its climax with a massive uprising led by Vercingetorix, a young and charismatic Arvernian chieftain who managed to unite a large part of Gaul against Rome. The decisive confrontation took place at Alesia, a natural fortress atop a steep hill. The siege of Alesia was a masterpiece of military strategy. Despite being outnumbered, Caesar surrounded the stronghold with vast fortifications, constructing a double ring of walls to defend against both the besieged and the relieving Gallic forces. After weeks of grueling combat, marked by shortages and desperate assaults, Vercingetorix was forced to surrender. This crushing victory effectively ended organized resistance in Gaul. Caesar had conquered an immense territory, added millions of souls to Rome's dominion, and amassed colossal wealth in plunder and slaves. More importantly, he had engraved his name indelibly into the annals of history. However, his triumph also sowed new fears in Rome. His enemies in the Senate, led by Cato the Younger and Pompey's supporters, viewed him as an existential threat to the fragile balance of the Republic. Caesar's growing popularity, his loyal army, and his newfound riches made him a figure of deep concern. For the moment, though, Caesar basked in his successes. He celebrated several triumphs in Rome, organized sumptuous festivities, distributed vast sums of money to the people, and solidified his political alliances. He had become the man of the hour, the idol of the masses, the commander revered by his soldiers. Yet deep within, Caesar knew that his military conquests were but a stage. The true prize, his ultimate ambition, remained: to master Rome itself. The political atmosphere in the Eternal City grew ever more tense. Alliances crumbled, ambitions flared, and the Republic staggered beneath its own contradictions. The inevitable rupture between Caesar and his former allies loomed closer with each passing day. The coming conflict would not be a mere political dispute. It would be a decisive struggle for the soul of Rome. A civil war where the sword would supplant the law and might would establish a new order. In the shadow of his Gallic victories, Caesar patiently prepared his next move. He understood that to reach supreme power, he would have to cross a forbidden threshold and commit an irreversible act. Soon, the waters of the Rubicon would be stirred, and history would be forever changed. Caesar's return to Italy, after his long campaigns in Gaul, marked one of the most dramatic turning points in Roman history. Strengthened by his immense military prestige and commanding a loyal army of seasoned veterans, Caesar immediately faced the hostility of the Senate, now heavily influenced by his former ally and rival, Pompey. In Rome, the political situation had deteriorated dangerously. The tensions between the Optimates, defenders of senatorial authority, and the populares, champions of reform and the common people, had reached their peak. Pompey, once Caesar's political partner, had aligned himself with the conservatives. Alarmed by the unstoppable rise of his former comrade, the Senate, fearing the return of a victorious general at the head of an army, demanded that Caesar resign his command before re-entering the city. According to Republican tradition, no general was permitted to cross the Rubicon, the small river marking the boundary of Italy proper, with an armed force. To do so was considered an act of treason. Caesar hesitated. He knew the enormity of the choice before him. Yet he also understood that returning without his legions would mean his ruin. Swift prosecution, political destruction, and personal annihilation at the hands of his enemies. According to legend, on a gloomy winter's evening in the year 49 before our era, Caesar, after long deliberation, uttered the famous words, "The die is cast." With his 13th legion, he crossed the Rubicon, setting into motion a civil war that would engulf the Republic. The response was immediate. Pompey and the senatorial faction abandoned Rome in haste, taking with them the state treasury and retreating southward, intent on gathering forces and securing the provinces of the east. Caesar, moving with his characteristic speed, occupied Rome without resistance. He carefully preserved the forms of legality, presenting himself not as a tyrant, but as the defender of the people and of the true republic against an oligarchy corrupted by greed and fear. In the months that followed, he secured control over Italy and then marched into Hispania, where Pompey's loyalists were attempting to regroup. In the campaign of Ilerda, Caesar showed remarkable clemency toward the defeated, further enhancing his image as a magnanimous leader. Yet the decisive confrontation still lay ahead. Pompey, having assembled a formidable army in Greece, awaited the final clash. Caesar, braving the treacherous Adriatic with a portion of his forces, faced grave difficulties: shortages of supplies, numerical inferiority, and wavering morale. The campaign was arduous and protracted. At last, the two forces met on the fields of Pharsalus in Thessaly. There, the fate of Rome was decided. Caesar, through his tactical genius, overcame Pompey's superior numbers. Utilizing his veteran legions with devastating precision, he shattered Pompey's right wing, sowing panic among his ranks. Realizing the battle was lost, Pompey fled the field and made for Egypt. The Battle of Pharsalus confirmed Caesar's supreme military prowess, yet the civil war was not over. Pockets of resistance still clung to hope, and Caesar would have to extinguish them to bring lasting order to the Roman world. Pursuing Pompey, Caesar arrived in Egypt, only to find new complications. Seeking refuge, Pompey had approached the young King Ptolemy XIII, only to be treacherously assassinated at the behest of the king's advisors. When Caesar landed in Alexandria, he was presented with Pompey's severed head. Far from rejoicing, he wept for his fallen rival, mourning the dignity of a great man cut down by treachery. Rather than withdraw, Caesar immersed himself in Egypt's internal struggles. The rivalry between Ptolemy XIII and his sister Cleopatra offered a strategic opportunity. Entranced by Cleopatra's intelligence, charisma, and ambition, Caesar threw his support behind her cause. Thus began the famous Alexandrian War, a difficult and perilous campaign in which Caesar narrowly escaped death. Eventually victorious, he secured Cleopatra's throne, ensuring that Egypt would remain a loyal client state under Roman influence. This Egyptian episode further burnished Caesar's legend, not merely as a conqueror, but as a figure of almost mythical stature. After consolidating his position in Egypt, Caesar marched swiftly to Asia Minor, where he defeated Pharnaces of Pontus with stunning speed at the Battle of Zela, famously summarizing the victory with the laconic words, "I came, I saw, I conquered." Turning next to Africa, he confronted the remnants of the senatorial forces under Cato and Metellus Scipio. At the Battle of Thapsus, he achieved a decisive victory. Cato, refusing to live under Caesar's rule, chose to take his own life at Utica. In the span of just a few years, Caesar had crushed all opposition. He now stood as the undisputed master of Rome. A new phase of his destiny was about to begin, one not of conquest, but of governance and transformation. Yet in the shadows, envy, resentment, and hatred quietly gathered. For although Caesar had conquered through arms, to conquer the hearts of Rome's elite would prove an infinitely more perilous challenge. With his enemies vanquished and peace restored across the provinces, Julius Caesar returned to Rome as the undisputed master of the Roman world. He was no longer merely a victorious general or an ambitious politician. He was the focal point of all attention, the living embodiment of a republic teetering on the brink of transformation. Though nominally limited by the old institutions, his power in practice was absolute. Yet far from succumbing to arrogance or idleness, Caesar launched an ambitious program of reforms. He understood that his dominance could not be maintained solely through military force. It would also depend on his ability to heal a republic weakened by inequality, corruption, and stagnation. One of his first tasks was to reorganize the Roman Senate. He revised its membership, enrolling new senators from among the loyal provinces, thereby altering the traditional balance of power within the aristocracy. He also strengthened the authority of provincial governors while demanding stricter standards of efficiency and integrity. In the economic sphere, Caesar initiated vast public works projects to provide employment for the urban poor. He reduced the distribution of free grain to encourage agricultural revitalization and facilitated land ownership for discharged soldiers and impoverished citizens. He enacted measures to alleviate debt, striving for a delicate compromise between creditors and debtors. On the social front, he introduced laws to encourage population growth among the upper classes, whose dwindling numbers threatened the Republic's future. He promoted tolerance toward the provinces, extending Roman citizenship to many conquered peoples, fostering a sense of unity across an increasingly diverse empire. Among his most enduring reforms was the restructuring of the calendar. With the assistance of Egyptian astronomers, he introduced the Julian calendar, a solar system of 365 days with a leap year every 4. This calendar, remarkable for its precision, would remain largely unchanged for more than 15 centuries. Caesar also set about embellishing Rome itself. He initiated the construction of new forums, basilicas, and temples, and undertook the renovation of the Senate House. His vision was to transform Rome from a chaotic, aging city into a majestic capital worthy of its burgeoning empire. Yet despite his efforts to enhance Rome and better the lives of its citizens, the concentration of so much power in the hands of one man sowed seeds of distrust, bitterness, and hatred. Caesar accumulated titles with alarming speed: dictator for 10 years, then dictator perpetuo, dictator for life, imperator hailed by his legions, and father of the fatherland honored by the people. He wore the triumphal robe, had his image minted on coins, and accepted honors verging on divine worship. Little by little, he drifted away from the republican traditions, approaching ever closer to the image of a monarch, a concept Romans abhorred. Within the Senate, his enemies, former Pompeians and die-hard defenders of the Republic, whispered in alarm. They saw in Caesar not a reformer, but a tyrant cloaked in the rhetoric of renewal. Tensions rose to a fever pitch when Caesar accepted honors deemed excessive. During a public ceremony, Mark Antony attempted to place a royal diadem upon his head. Though Caesar publicly refused, the gesture left lingering doubts. Did he secretly aspire to kingship? In the streets, in the corridors of aristocratic villas, in the hushed corners of the forums, a conspiracy slowly took form. Those unwilling to watch the death of the Republic in silence banded together in secret. At the heart of the conspiracy stood Marcus Junius Brutus, a man Caesar loved almost as a son. Descended from one of the families that had expelled Rome's last king centuries earlier, Brutus struggled with an agonizing inner conflict between loyalty to Caesar and duty to the Republic. Alongside him, Gaius Cassius Longinus, more embittered and calculating, labored tirelessly to recruit others. Gradually, about 60 senators, many of them former friends and allies of Caesar, pledged themselves to act. The date was set, the Ides of March, a day traditionally laden with omens and religious significance. They would strike at the heart of power within the sanctified walls of the Senate at the Theatre of Pompey, a place laden with bitter irony, dedicated to Caesar's once great rival. Meanwhile, Caesar, confident in his star, ignored or dismissed the mounting warnings. Dark dreams, ominous auguries, disturbing visions, all seemed to portend disaster. Yet the man who had defied both gods and men would not be swayed by superstition. On the morning of the 15th of March, Calpurnia, his wife, implored him not to leave their house, haunted by nightmares of blood and death. Caesar hesitated, but was ultimately persuaded by Decimus Brutus, one of the conspirators, to attend the Senate session. He had no idea that he was walking to meet his fate, the 15th of March in the year 44, before our era dawned under a pale sky, veiled in a thin mist that draped Rome in an eerie silence. In the still sleeping streets, A few early risers whispered nervously about the ominous signs and dark prophecies that had accumulated in the preceding days. Everything seemed to foretell that this would not be an ordinary day. Julius Caesar, either oblivious to or disdainful of these warnings, set out toward the place where fate awaited him. The theater of Pompey, where the Senate now convened during the renovation of the Curia, rose grandly near the Field of Mars. Its white marble columns, its silent statues, seemed to stand as somber witnesses to what was about to unfold. The conspirators were already in position. Concealing daggers beneath their togas, they exchanged tense glances, steeling themselves for the moment they had long planned. Though each was resolved, fear and the heavy weight of betrayal gnawed at their hearts. As Caesar approached, he received a final warning. A soothsayer named Spurinna had earlier advised him to beware the Ides of March. That very morning, a note detailing the plot was thrust into his hand. But amid the press of people and the demands of the day, Caesar set it aside, unread. When he entered the portico of the theater, conversation ceased abruptly. Every eye turned to him. Some greeted him hurriedly, others averted their gaze, unable to mask their inner turmoil. Clad in his triumphal robe, Caesar advanced with steady steps, unaware of the abyss that yawned before him. He took his seat, prepared to preside over the day's proceedings. It was then that the conspirators moved in under the pretext of presenting a petition. Lucius Tillius Cimber was the first to approach, thrusting his plea into Caesar's hands. When Caesar pushed it aside impatiently, Cimber seized his toga and yanked it down from his shoulders. The signal. The first blow struck only a glancing wound. Startled, Caesar rose to defend himself, but at once the daggers rained down upon him. He fought back, grasping the hand of one assailant, but he was one man against many. The attack was frenzied, chaotic, and merciless. Then, through the flurry of blades, Caesar caught sight of Marcus Junius Brutus. According to ancient tradition, he uttered the fateful words, "You too, my son." With that, he ceased his struggle, surrendering himself to the inevitable. Bleeding from numerous wounds, he collapsed at the foot of the statue of Pompey, his once great rival. There, amid the marble splendor and the cold silence of the Senate, Julius Caesar breathed his last. The aftermath was chilling. The conspirators, their hands stained with blood, raised their daggers high and proclaimed the death of tyranny and the restoration of liberty. Yet around them there was no chorus of acclamation, only a deep and dreadful silence. For a time, Caesar's body lay abandoned until a few loyal servants, summoned by discreet allies, carried it away. In his home, Calpurnia wept in silence beside his lifeless form, while outside, the city slowly awoke to the terrible news. Across the forums and markets, the people of Rome reacted not with joy, but with horror and grief. For many, Caesar had been a benefactor, a man who had brought victories abroad, reforms at home, and a vision of a Rome renewed. The conspirators had miscalculated. Mark Antony, ever attuned to the pulse of the masses, seized the moment. He organized a grand public funeral. Standing before the gathered throngs, he delivered a speech that would echo through history. Holding up Caesar's bloody toga, he read aloud the generous bequests that Caesar had left to the citizens of Rome. Slowly, methodically, he turned the people's grief into fury. Rome erupted in chaos. The Forum became a sea of anger. An enormous pyre was hastily built, and Caesar's body was burned in the open air amid a storm of lamentation. Riots broke out. The houses of the conspirators were attacked, their property looted and destroyed. The dream of restoring the old republic died with Caesar's blood. In its place rose a new and terrible reality. a Roman world consumed by revenge, by civil war, by the relentless struggle for supreme power. In the ashes of that funeral pyre, new leaders emerged. Octavian, the adopted son and heir of Caesar, Mark Antony, the charismatic general, and Lepidus, the silent opportunist. Together, they would form a new triumvirate, swearing vengeance and reshaping the destiny of Rome once more. The Republic was dead. What would rise in its place was yet to be written, but it would bear the mark of blood, ambition, and the shadow of Julius Caesar. In the aftermath of Julius Caesar's assassination, Rome descended into a period of profound turbulence and growing uncertainty. The senators who had conspired to kill him, believing they had restored the Republic, quickly found themselves isolated, despised by much of the populace, and unable to reassert control over a city teetering on the brink of chaos. The vacuum of power left by Caesar's death drew new ambitions into the open. Chief among them was Marcus Antonius, or Mark Antony, Caesar's former ally and a masterful manipulator of public sentiment. Charismatic, forceful, and astute, he seized upon the people's grief and indignation to position himself as the true heir to Caesar's legacy. In the days following the funeral, Antony moved swiftly. He secured control over the treasury, rallied key military units, and sought to dominate the fractured political scene. Meanwhile, the conspirators, realizing that public opinion had turned against them, fled Rome, seeking refuge first in Italy's provinces and then in the east. But another figure was quietly emerging: Gaius Octavius, known simply as Octavian. Barely 19 years old, Caesar's great-nephew and adopted son had been named heir in Caesar's will. Though young and physically frail, Octavian possessed a sharp, calculating mind and an ambition as cold as iron. Upon his arrival in Italy, Octavian understood immediately that his greatest weapon was his name. Presenting himself as the rightful successor to Caesar, he courted the legions and began raising his own forces, maneuvering skillfully despite lacking formal authority. Tensions between Antony and Octavian escalated rapidly. Antony, asserting dominance, tried to sideline the youth. Octavian, with astonishing political dexterity, exploited the Senate's fear of Antony's growing power, winning support and securing authorization to lead military action against him. Thus erupted a new phase of civil war. The conflict culminated in the Battle of Mutina, where Antony was defeated and forced to retreat toward Gaul. Yet victory did not herald a restoration of the old republic. It merely reshaped the struggle for supremacy. Recognizing the temporary necessity of unity, Octavian approached Antony and Lepidus, another of Caesar's former allies. In the year 43 before our era, the three men formed the Second Triumvirate, a legally sanctioned alliance endowed with sweeping powers to govern the Republic and punish its enemies. The Triumvirate's first act was brutal, a series of proscriptions. Hundreds of senators and equestrians were declared enemies of the state, their properties confiscated, their lives forfeit. Among their victims was Cicero, the eloquent defender of republican ideals, who fell victim to Antony's vengeance. As blood flowed in Rome, the triumvirs turned their gaze eastward, where Brutus and Cassius, the principal architects of Caesar's assassination, had gathered formidable armies. The final confrontation was inevitable. In the year 42 before our era, at the twin battles of Philippi in Macedonia, the two sides clashed. The fighting was desperate and fierce. Brutus and Cassius, driven by the ideals of liberty, fought with all their strength, but the superior numbers and organization of the triumvirs prevailed. Cassius, misled into believing all was lost, took his own life. Weeks later, Brutus, defeated and disillusioned, chose the same fate, falling on his sword to avoid capture. With their deaths, the last true champions of the Republic were extinguished. The cause of liberty, for which they had bled and died, was lost. Following their victory, the triumvirs divided the spoils of empire. Antony assumed control of the east, Lepidus was relegated to Africa, and Octavian returned to Italy to address the growing unrest among veterans and the restive provinces. Tensions within the triumvirate soon flared. Lepidus, seen as weak and unreliable, was swiftly marginalized. The uneasy alliance between Octavian and Antony began to unravel. Antony, entangled in a passionate and politically dangerous relationship with Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, scandalized Rome. Octavian, ever the master of propaganda, portrayed Antony as a man bewitched by Eastern decadence, a traitor who had abandoned Roman virtues. Meanwhile, Octavian consolidated his grip on the West. He presented himself as the defender of Roman tradition, the guardian of the Republic's sacred heritage, and the true heir to Caesar's vision. The final confrontation was drawing near. Rome, weary from decades of civil strife, longed for peace and order. But for Octavian, defeating Antony was not enough. He needed to become the uncontested master of Rome, both by right and by the will of the people. Thus, under the shadow of shattered ideals and broken alliances, the stage was set for a decisive struggle that would forever change the course of Roman history. The rivalry between Octavian and Mark Antony, long concealed behind diplomatic courtesies and political maneuverings, finally erupted into open conflict. On one side stood Octavian, young, patient, and ruthless, the careful architect of his own destiny. On the other, Antony, a seasoned general, charismatic but increasingly entangled in the luxurious and alien world of the East, bound to Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. Octavian masterfully exploited this connection. He depicted Antony not as a Roman hero, but as a man corrupted by Eastern decadence, bewitched by a foreign queen. When the contents of Antony's will were made public, revealing, among other things, his desire to be buried alongside Cleopatra in Egypt, outrage swept through Rome. Under Octavian's influence, the Senate declared war not on Antony, but on Cleopatra, framing the coming struggle as a defense of Roman values against Eastern subjugation. The decisive clash came in the year 31 before our era, off the coast of Greece at Actium. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his brilliant general Agrippa, was modern, disciplined, and strategically superior. Antony's forces, though brave, were demoralized and strained by divided loyalties. In the midst of battle, Cleopatra, fearing total defeat, withdrew with her ships. Antony, torn between military duty and passion, made the fateful decision to follow her, abandoning his fleet to its fate. The rout was complete. Actium was not just a military victory, it was a triumph of will, strategy, and image. Octavian pursued his enemies relentlessly. The following year, he entered Alexandria. Antony, faced with inevitable defeat, fell upon his sword. Cleopatra, refusing to endure the humiliation of captivity, is said to have ended her life by the bite of an asp. With their deaths, resistance crumbled. Egypt was annexed as a Roman province, but under Octavian's direct control, a symbol of his personal dominion over the wealthiest and most ancient kingdom of the Mediterranean. Returning to Rome, Octavian moved with deliberate caution. He did not declare himself king or dictator. Instead, he presented himself as the humble restorer of the Republic's traditions. In the year 27 before our era, in a carefully orchestrated display of deference, he offered to relinquish his extraordinary powers back to the Senate. The Senate, grateful or fearful, immediately bestowed upon him greater honors. He was given the title Augustus, meaning the revered one, and styled himself Princeps, the first among citizens. Thus was born the Principate, a political system. where the outward forms of the Republic remained, but real power resided in the hands of a single man. Augustus reorganized the military, creating the Praetorian Guard as his personal protectors. He reformed provincial governance, stabilized the finances of the state, and encouraged a return to traditional Roman values. Under his rule, Rome experienced an unprecedented era of peace and prosperity, the Pax Romana. Temples were rebuilt, public works flourished, literature and the arts reached new heights. Augustus was careful to associate his reign with the idea of renewal, of a Rome reborn from the ashes of civil war. The memory of Julius Caesar was preserved and venerated. Festivals honored his name. Monuments rose in his memory. The month of Quintilis was renamed Julius, July, in tribute to him. Thus, what Caesar had dreamed amidst the clash of swords and the roar of battle, Augustus fulfilled through patience, diplomacy, and political genius. The Roman Empire was born, not with a shout of revolution, but under the solemn embrace of tradition reimagined. The Roman people, exhausted by generations of bloodshed and turmoil, embraced this new order. Freedom had been sacrificed, but in its place they received peace, order, and a glory that would endure for centuries. The vision of Caesar, of a strong, unified, eternal Rome, had become reality. Long after his death, the shadow of Julius Caesar continued to stretch across Rome, the empire, and beyond the confines of centuries and continents. His name, now legend, passed through time with a force that few men have ever matched. He was not merely a figure of history, he became a symbol. In Rome, his memory was carefully nurtured by Augustus, his adopted son and successor. In the forums, on the coins, in the public ceremonies, the image of Caesar was omnipresent. His assassination was not remembered as the fall of a tyrant, but as the martyrdom of a visionary betrayed by those he had sought to save. The month of his birth, once called Quintilis, was renamed July in his honor, a lasting tribute in the calendar he himself had reformed. His likeness, sculpted in marble and struck into silver, became an enduring model of majesty. His legacy, both legal and political, seeped deeply into the very structure of imperial governance. But beyond monuments and laws, Caesar left an indelible mark on the collective imagination. He became the embodiment of political genius, of unmatched military strategy, of the man of action who could bend the world to his will. Ancient historians such as Suetonius, Plutarch, and Appian found in him an endless source of fascination. They chronicled his virtues and vices, his dazzling victories and tragic flaws, attempting to understand the enigma of a man who seemed to transcend human limitations. They praised his clemency, his courage, his sharp intellect, while lamenting his insatiable ambition. Over the centuries, his image evolved. In the Christianized Middle Ages, he was viewed with a mixture of admiration and suspicion, a pagan conqueror whose memory could neither be erased nor ignored. During the Renaissance, his political acumen and literary clarity, exemplified in his commentaries, were rediscovered and celebrated. On the stage, Shakespeare immortalized Caesar, portraying him not merely as a powerful man, but as a symbol of the eternal conflicts of power, betrayal, and destiny. Through the poet's words, Caesar acquired a new dimension, that of the tragic hero, struck down at the height of his glory. In modern politics, his name became synonymous with supreme authority. The title of Caesar lived on, as Kaiser in Germany and Tsar in Russia, testifying to the enduring power of his legend. Yet who was Julius Caesar, truly? Was he the sincere friend of the people, or the relentless seeker of power? The visionary reformer, or the destroyer of the Republic? The magnanimous leader, or the ruthless strategist? The truth, as always, is complex. Caesar was all of these things. He was the product of his time, a time of violence, inequality, and collapse. And he seized his moment with unmatched clarity and daring. He understood, better than anyone, that Rome could no longer survive without radical change. He wielded force when needed, but also persuasion, intelligence, and charm. He knew when to strike, when to wait, when to punish, and when to forgive. His understanding of human nature, his ability to foresee the moves of friends and foes alike, made him not just a conqueror, but an unrivaled master of political life. His legacy is also a warning. By overturning the balances of the Republic in favor of personal rule, he opened the door to absolutism. The empire rose from his vision, but also from the ruin of the old freedoms. Still, despite the criticisms, Julius Caesar endures in the memory of the world as the archetype of the exceptional man, the one who does not merely endure history, but who shapes it, who bends it to his design, and leaves a mark that time cannot erase. In every age of crisis, whenever humanity searches for figures capable of altering the course of destiny, the shadow of Caesar reappears, not as a simple memory, but as an eternal question. What does it take to change the world? And at what cost? Among the ruins of the Roman Forum, where broken columns whisper to the wind, his spirit still seems to linger. Where once the impassioned debates rang out and the legions marched in triumph, remains the memory of a man who dreamed of an eternal Rome. And in some way, his dream lives on.